floor is yours.
Thank you, Ilyich. Well, dear friends, the future comes over us from behind. And if we want an inspiring religion tomorrow that brings out the best in people and creates a dynamic, harmonious society, we must work on it now, because the future begins now. For each of us, the religion of tomorrow can already be a reality today. If you wait and do nothing, nothing will happen. And then tomorrow will be devoid of a new religion. But acting without a plan, without a proper thought is not desirable either. And therefore, we must think carefully about what religion is, as we did in the workshops, and to which it must comply if it is to be a solid foundation for a harmonious society that we also crave. In the first lecture we spoke of homesickness, the longing for a greater truth. However, that longing is not an end point. We need to identify the characteristics of this religion, as we have just discussed, and based on the previous two talks we have identified 3 general main characteristics that we would like to discuss with you. And of course these characteristics are not set in stone. They can certainly be sharpened and added to. I would like to hear later from the workshop leaders additions and perhaps examples of how this religion can inspire us. These 3 general characteristics that we have identified cannot be separated. They form a unity. But for the sake of clarity, we have divided them into wisdom, compassion, and peace. Let's start with the first main quality, wisdom. Wisdom is activated in us when we no longer interpret phenomena as separate, but recognize that everything is inseparable. A child who sees that the butterfly has everything to do with the caterpillar has already developed some wisdom at his or her level. It becomes easier to see the connections between all these phenomena if you start from the spiritualistic principle. Then you realize that behind everything we observe there is life or consciousness. That life has a common origin. So everything is alive and everything is connected in a gigantic web of life in which nothing is separate. In this web there are what you may call horizontal connections. These are the connections between beings on the same level, on the same plane of existence. For example, the relationships between human beings on this planet Earth. There are also vertical links, and these are connections between the different realms of nature, such as humans and animals and plants, as well as the realms of beings more advanced than humans, which we can call the kingdoms of the gods. Everything is interconnected. There are also vertical relationships within each individual being. In other words, every being is a hierarchy in itself. Think of the human being as a stream of consciousness that contains consciousnesses that are much more advanced than the personal human being. In other words, within each human being lives a God, our inner deity. And with this inner God, we are intimately connected, even though we often do not realize it. Becoming aware of this inseparable connection between all beings, far and not far developed, can be called the element of religare, connecting with your inner core, which is the inner core of all that lives. If you are aware of the oneness of all beings and act accordingly, then you are a wise person. And of course, there are degrees of wisdom, degrees of awareness of oneness. You can grow in wisdom. You can practice in it. And how do you do that? Study the relationships between beings. Open your heart. Use your intuition and try to see how everything works together. Studying Theosophia helps tremendously because in Theosophia the relationships between all beings come out so clearly. Then imagine this oneness. Imagine a society or a world in which there is a realization that we are connected in a great web of life and that we have a common origin, a common destiny, and this need not to be an abstraction. Imagine an ideal world, one in which people live in this awareness of oneness. How do they think? How do they live? What does a world look like that is so noble that you have to stand on your toes to reach it? People often talk about meditation to gain spiritual insight. And meditation can indeed give you a tremendous boost in your spiritual development. But then you have to see meditation as an active process in which you consciously create the mental image of oneness. See the other as part of yourself. Or even better, see the other as yourself. Identify with the other, with your friends, with your enemies, if you have any, and try to realize that you are all of them. Early in the morning, as the sun rises, is an excellent time to think about this. You can read a passage from an inspirational book and then let the meaning sink in. How differently you begin the day's commitments when you do this, as opposed to going to work hurried and irritated. If you practice this, you will eventually be able to carry such a sublime image with you 24 hours a day. It is always present in the background of your consciousness, even as you fulfill the obligations of the day. All your thoughts and actions are colored by it. It gives you an inner peace which you radiate to those around you. At night, before going to bed, review the events of the past day, and if at any moment the stress of daily life has caused you to forget the ideal, resolve to do it better next time. Forgive any wrongs that may have been done to you. If you are honest with yourself, you will quickly grow in wisdom. Now something paradoxical happens as you grow in wisdom. For you realize more and more that there is much you don't know and that there are people who are much wiser than you. In other words, the fact that there are wiser people than you becomes more and more a reality for you. This realization also belongs to religion, to the connective aspect of your consciousness, for you are connecting more and more with the light side of nature. Now, you can only recognize wisdom in others if you have developed at least some wisdom within yourself. In other words, you're making contact with your inner teacher. You are experiencing more and more the influence that flows from your inner God. As a result, you begin to recognize outer teachers as well. At the same time, you feel an obligation to inspire, to teach and support others who know even less than you. You are both student and teacher. This creates a wonderful cooperation between all people, regardless of their position in society. Everyone contributes to the whole, and the whole enables everyone to contribute. When you start from oneness, you know that we all belong to each other and that we have built our society together. Then you realize that it is possible for everyone to make their specific contribution. Everyone is essentially a divine being and has developed certain abilities that can be used for the benefit of the whole. Finally, another aspect of this unifying religious power, as Erwin mentioned in his talk, religion should never be separated from science and philosophy. If you do that, you cripple yourself in your thinking. It's the synthesis of religion, philosophy, and science that contains true wisdom. I would now like to ask the workshop leaders if they have any examples of this aspect of religion that have been discussed in the workshop. And maybe they have any additions. So, Erwin, you're the first one.
Yes, well, it's an idea that came up in the second workshop that lines up really well with what you just explained about giving everyone also the space or the room, how do you call that, to express their potentials. So we discussed actually the idea of necessity. Someone says, is there not also a certain aspect of necessity to being religious? Because there are so many things that call for us in to relieve suffering, things that we see in life, all kinds of suffering, but also to be also in our daily environment, a call upon us to be part of a larger whole, being it on our work, in our family, etc. So we really discussed this idea of necessity, and then we came up also with this quote from Blavatsky where she actually says karma is the law of necessity. So, and that made also something really clear, that we karmically also come into situations in a certain context that that requires something from us, and their wisdom comes in, because if we understand these laws, if we know how this works, then we can also we are more conscious of what that we have a role, and then are also thinking what can be our role, and will also act more accordingly from that idea of unity. So I think that is a really nice addition.
Okay, thanks. Herman?
I will say that the subject religion, and of course the first workshop, the question, how can you experience oneness? That was quite a wide discussion and was not very easy to answer. What you can say, of course, that experience and that inside view you can build is a very individual one. And experience the oneness is also steps in your own nature according to your development, to approach the idea and to recognize that everything is one. So, and that is a very individual one, of course, very much dictated by our background, the way we think, coming from science, coming from mathematics, coming from this or that, and so on. That is the way we filling in, yeah? And that is, in fact, also a straight answer that this is also the way we build up wisdom, yeah? So, and then you get, is the third step, is that you realize that your wisdom is your experience, but then not a personal one, but an approach what is a very universal one and what is the best for everyone. So in itself, it was quite abstract to come to concrete conclusions.
Okay, thanks. Renate.
If we are looking at is searching for the oneness, is that believing or is it seeking for truth? Well, actually, it is of course seeking for truth, and also consciously connecting with it. And in the first reading, we were talking about that we essentially are that one life. And that there were a couple of things said, like we are drops in the oceans of life, or we are like the one life is like the tree through which the cosmic stream flows. And there was one nice word, like someone said, it is the universe is like a used mosaic. And I did like that, because this is another point of view you can look about the oneness. And she said also every being fits perfect in its place, and each being also has its corresponding dharma. So the oneness of life also has to do with dharma, that what you do in life. Are you contributing to it or not? And we were talking about how to keep the harmony of this universe is, of course, where we all can work on. And it is an abstract idea, but you can have that on the background of your mind with everything what you are doing in your life to contribute to the whole.
Okay, thanks. Oh, in the workshop I was participating, it was also concluded that it is very difficult to define oneness. It may be even impossible to define oneness, because the real oneness is the boundlessness, and the boundlessness you can never grasp totally. Nevertheless, although it's very abstract and difficult, nevertheless everybody, we conclude, can have some idea of it. We were talking about that, well, most of us, maybe all human beings, know or feel that they are part of a greater whole. They have all the same, ideas, ideals about how the world should be, about peace, etc., love, and all that kind of stuff. But you should see it also as a process. It's not so that from one day or another you grasp the idea of oneness, but it's a process in which your perception is growing. And although it is very abstract and difficult, it can be very practical as well. If you look through the other window, in the talk that was talking about two windows, and if you look to the window that shows the world, how the world should be, we can paint for ourselves a mind picture of an ideal world in which everybody recognizes, depending on the level, of course, the oneness of life. And then that was interesting. In the first lecture, we already conclude that you have to work for it. This before Erwin gave his talk, we already were talking about working for it. And well, the last conclusion is that you don't have to strive for that ideal society, but you have to live it, and you can live it now. That was more or less the ideas we discussed in our workshop. And well, now is the second part of the talk, so I'm going to say goodbye to the other ones. Well, the second main characteristic of religion is compassion. We understand compassion to be a state of consciousness in which you experience the oneness of all life and think and act accordingly, whatever that means to you. You always see yourself as part of the greater whole. Wherever you are, whatever you do, you recognize the oneness and act accordingly. You can do nothing but act in accordance with the image of connectedness. We have linked compassion to the element of relicere, choice. What do you have to choose between? Between the part of you that experiences the unity and the part that does not. The first is the impersonal, or rather the superpersonal within the human being. We call it the higher self. And the second part is the personal element in us. This personal element is the mask, the instrument through which the real superpersonal human being manifests itself. The personal does not know the sense of oneness and lives in the illusion, because it is an illusion, that we are separate from each other. Relicere is the choice for the superpersonal, the second aspect of religion. Now above we spoke of vertical and horizontal connection. On closer inspection, however, they are the same. When you connect with your higher self, you are simultaneously connecting with your fellow human beings. After all, the higher self lives in the awareness of oneness. The same is found in the Gospels of the Bible. Erwin mentioned it already, where Jesus says that there are two commandments that are actually one. Loving your inner God is the first commandment, which is the same, it says so literally in the Bible, which is the same as loving your neighbor. And that makes sense, because when you love the oneness of life, you love everything, because everything belongs to the oneness. The religion of tomorrow is not a theoretical doctrine with dogmas and rituals, creeds and prayers, not at all. It's a realization that permeates all your thoughts and actions. It is a mindset that is very practical and is practiced every moment of the day, not just on Sundays and not just when you pray 5 times a day. No, it's a constant awareness, a constant focus on the superpersonal within you. Compassion is the state of consciousness, we said. Think carefully about this state. It is not so difficult to be good for your family and your friends and your countrymen, to the people you like. But that's not compassion if you exclude the others at the same time. That is setting boundaries, because you are distinguishing between people, between friends and non-friends, whereas compassion knows no boundaries and is universal by definition. As a compassionate person, you are always above parties. You have no sectional interests. For you, there is no division between country people and city people, between Russians and Ukrainians. They are all human beings, all on pilgrimage, following their homesickness for the ultimate reality. And some get lost on the way. All the more reason to fulfill your function as a signpost. And don't think that compassion means just being nice to each other. Of course, we always respect the sincere views of others. But if someone is being unjust, a compassionate person will take a stand against it. He does not take a stand against the other person, but against the unjust situation. Every human being is a god in the making, but very few still have a sense of that. And some of us have strayed so far from our own core that we can do the most terrible things to others. A compassionate person, despite the limited wisdom they may have, will always try to teach the other person to look at life in a different way, so that harmony is restored, or at least the victims of cruelty and brutality are protected. Keep this in mind with refugees, for example. Determine for yourself, with the wisdom you have developed, assuming and choosing unity, what your mental attitude is towards them. Be calm, be compassionate, and do not get caught up in the emotional waves that this issue has created in so many countries. Also determine for yourself what your mental attitude should be towards our weak brothers. And by weak brothers I do not mean those who cannot stand up for themselves, but people who break the laws of the land and ignore the whispers of their conscience. Some of them end up in jail, some of them don't. How do we help these gods in the making? For they are too latent deities. It may have happened to you that you have been wronged. For example, you may have had something stolen from you, or someone may have dented your car and driven away. We are not saying that a compassionate attitude means that you should just let it happen, or rather that you should continue to assume the oneness of which everyone is a part. Do you have feelings of revenge when something like this happens to you? Do you wish misfortune upon the other person? If so, think again about relateren, about choosing between your higher self and your lower self. And these are not theoretical exercises. Life itself is a school of learning in which it will become clear whether you are truly compassionate or whether it is nothing more than an idle intention. It is always a matter of developing a mental attitude of compassion. That's the most important thing. Even if your wisdom is limited, if you sincerely practice compassion, you will quickly learn how to better shape unity in cooperation with others. Now I would like to ask the workshop leaders again if they have any additions and perhaps wonderful examples of compassion. Who wants to start? Renate, we go the other way around now.
This was a very vivid conversation. A few points were very nice. So Aaron said in his lecture very clear, to be wise is to act wisely. And in someone said very nice, to be religious is to act religiously. And of course that is a mental attitude of walk your words. And you have to exercise in this inner attitude to just contribute to the totality in whatever way possible. And you must bring it into action. And we have talked about the dynamics of it, because actually life is changing every time, and nothing is not changing. So you have to never take something for granted, but try to be dynamic in your practice. So you have to discern what is needed on a certain situation, and then try to act according to your best vision of wisdom and compassion you have learned of that. And maybe the hardest, well, I'm not sure of that hardest point, but Wu Wei is a point that Aaron also mentioned. We talked about that you do everything without doing, so to speak. So everything you do for the totality. Not trying to expect results, and you don't feel it as an obligation, so that it is almost impossible for you not to do it. So that's the kind of exercise we have talked about.
Okay, thank you. So, Herman?
You know, there was only one thing, and that is always a point what is coming on the table, not only in this workshop, but many times in other situations as well, is that if you want to be compassionate, yeah, how do you do that? You want to be compassionate and you behave, or is it from compassion point of view that you are having built up a certain attitude, a mentality, what you radiate, and everything what come across your karma, your path, and you are able to help or to inspire, you do so. Yeah? You see the point what I like to make? You can say, okay, for instance, I like to do a course being compassionate, yeah? Or is that something what is coming from, from inner out? I myself think if you're answering the first workshop's question, can you be religious? For me, that is almost the same as being compassionate. Because in my thinking, there is no way that you're going out from the oneness and only act for a part. Because if there is a oneness, you should act for the totality, as far as possible within your consciousness and your possibilities, etc., etc. But you should not separate a part from the whole. Yeah.
So you think, Herman, that there is no wisdom without compassion?
For me, there is no wisdom without compassion. If you call that wisdom without compassion wisdom, I think then you have, how do you call that, a second order wisdom. And wisdom more from the personal point of view.
Yeah, very clear. Yeah, thank you. Aaron?
Yes, well, I just, with the previous part, gave some examples from the second workshop, and now it fits well to give some ideas from the first workshop on compassion. So actually, we started with this idea that, of course, you can expand your consciousness by meditating, by questioning, by studying, but that it is really important to also put these ideas into practice. And someone explained that if we talk about this longing for unity that Renate talked about, this homesickness, is when you put these ideas of the one life and unity and all these theosophical ideas into practice, it is replaced by the experience of unity. So the desire, the longing is more or less fulfilled when you really put these ideas into action, which is, I think, also synonymous with compassion. And I think we also talked about this idea, but we didn't mention Wu Wei explicitly, but it's actually the same, that as long as we still hold this idea of I have to help, I have to be compassionate, I, etc., etc., then we have not yet reached the level where we identify with this inner higher part within ourselves, when it's just natural to do it and you don't even, well, have to have someone said the I just dissolves, it just disappears, because then it's just the most natural thing you do. So that's also something we talked about.
Well, a lot of issues that were discussed in both your workshops were in ours also. For instance, the last one was one of our participants who said, just talking about me is not the right way. We have to do it, naturally, without thinking of me. Well, the first thing that was discussed in the second workshop in our group was that we all concluded that you need effort, but what kind of effort? So quite a long time we discussed about if you have to fight your lower elements, your lower self, or not. And like in your workshops, we talk about wu wei, about how to act without acting, so doing the things naturally, because without for yourself any result. One of our group said, well, a good method is, if you are in a kind of situation you want to know how to act, you can imagine how a master or a Buddha would act, or someone who is very wise, or your higher self would act in that kind of situation. So the conclusion was, don't fight the lower, don't fight your lower self, but concentrate on the higher aspects. And if you have an idea of the oneness, and that idea is in the background of your consciousness, you will create, because one of the questions was also, what is the effect on the society, if you really are a religious person? Or one of the effects is that you create a mental atmosphere in which you always have a kind of influence on your surroundings. Maybe in the beginning people say you are crazy, but after some time, when you're really serious, be religious, it will have its effect. And if you imagine, a group of persons who is able to create that other mental atmosphere, it will, without any doubt, have an influence on the situation in our world. And one of the beautiful ideas is also a story that a lot of you will know about one of the chelas who was working with the ox to plow the soil, and those animals were very difficult to handle, but because he had so beautiful thought life, his mind was focused on, the beautiful spiritual things. So the influence on the ox, was in a way that they did exactly what they should do. And we are not working with ox or animals, but we can create, such a beautiful atmosphere, a mental atmosphere, in order to purify the society. Another thing that was discussed in our group was, can you do it alone? Or can you only do that spiritual effort with others? Well, in fact, we concluded that you should walk the path, the spiritual path alone. I cannot learn for another, and that other person cannot learn from me, but we can inspire each other, we can advise each other. So, in my point of view, my opinion is that I am very happy with the friends I have, so we can exchange ideas, we can inspire each other, we can work together, and that helps me enormously to be a more spiritual person. And I think that is for a lot of people. So you have to walk alone, you have to make your own decisions, you have to walk the path, but we can help each other, we can inspire each other, we can be a signpost for each other, and not just for Theosophists, of course, but for everybody. One of you have something to add? Or can we go to the last part of the talk? Well, what happens to us and our environment when we actually begin to practice the religion described in this and the previous lectures? Within ourselves, the focus will shift from the outer world to the inner world. Choosing the higher self becomes natural, and the oneness behind the phenomena we will increasingly experience as reality. And this will bring us tremendous inner peace. When you know for sure that you are an indestructible part of a great whole, all kinds of fears and frustrations and worries naturally fall away. You know that nothing really serious can ever happen to you. Of course, certain discomforts and difficulties will not disappear overnight, but you will interpret them in a completely different way. You know that the condition you are in has caused you created yourself, or you partly created that situation yourself. And that gives you the conviction that you have the means to handle any challenge and bring it to a good solution. You don't blame others, an attitude that can often lead to frustration and even depression. You act with peace of mind according to what you know deep down inside. And this mental attitude undoubtedly has an effect on your fellow human beings. You may have experienced that in a painful or precarious situation there was someone who remained calm and calmed the others. Even if someone is treated aggressively, perhaps even physically threatened, and yet remains calm, this can have a calming effect on the aggressor, and the aggressor may even immediately change his attitude, turn over a new leaf, and apologize for his aggression. When you purify your thinking, it affects your behavior, because there is a thought behind every action. Therefore, think kindly of others, and you will treat them kindly. Gentleness leads you to stand up courageously for others. Be frugal with yourself, then you can be generous. Do not place yourself above others in your thoughts, and your proper, humble conduct will be noticed, and people will regard you as a true leader. And this influence of the truly religious man can reach far. Every man is a thinker. All our thoughts create a mental sphere. Are we always aware of it? Do we realize that a selfish thought can negatively affect the mental sphere and make people aggressive? On the other hand, true religious thoughts can ennoble the mental sphere and inspire people to be compassionate. The religion of the future will cause the mental sphere to be purified of all selfishness and hostility. The mental sphere will increasingly reflect the idea of unity by which we are all inspired. This will create dynamic harmony. The religion of tomorrow will not lead to a standstill. On the contrary, there has always been and always will be change. In such a state of dynamic harmony, people will increasingly come to perfection, knowing that there will never be an end point in the growth of consciousness. We began this lecture with the thought that the future comes from behind. The seeds we sow today will bear fruit tomorrow. Well, the time for sowing has come. In today's zeitgeist, one personality is pitted against another. One country or block of countries is opposed against another. But this selfish mentality has no future. It is in fact a past station. The idea of interconnectedness, the idea of unity has a future. And the more we succeed in spreading this idea, the faster this future will become reality. The challenges facing humanity are great. We can only meet them together. But if we want to, we can. The future begins now. Right now, our thoughts and actions can be guided by wisdom and compassion, the ingredients of true religion. The choice is ours. We can be a forerunner of that inspiring, driving force that propels everything forward and makes us realize that we are all rooted in the same life and therefore are brothers to one another. Brothers with a common destiny. Thank you for your attention.